Good evening. Welcome, everybody. I've got two exciting guests with me today. I have got the Canadian. He is back. And I also got Zach Miller. Zach, who is apparently getting ready for Halloween, already dressing up as Indiana Jones. We thought you were going to dress. We thought you were going to dress as Moses. I sent Zach, hey, send me an image of you for the thumbnail. He sent me that. I'm like, all right, it's going in the thumbnail. And then I figured you were going to dress as Moses, and no, you come as Indiana Jones. So I'm
a fraud.
You're just a man of many costumes, I guess.
Yes. I'll show you guys the rest of them later.
I don't think you need to try on outfits for us. We're cool. We're both married, so appreciate it though. So, all right, welcome everyone. I have linked both of their channels below. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Zach? Since I think this is your first time on my channel.
That's certainly possible. Yep. So I interview biblical scholars on topics related to the Bible. So topics like we're talking about today, the Old Testament and Genesis and all kinds of different apologetics topics, trying to help people understand the Bible a little bit better.
Awesome. And then Than's here. Anyway, let's move on. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead, Than. Tell us about yourself.
I just make videos about stuff.
All right. Perfect. That works.
Like and subscribe.
So, yeah. Appreciate you guys both coming on. I was going to stream with Stephen Boyce earlier this week, but he got hit pretty bad by the hurricane. So I was like, I know we had talked about doing the stream, so I was planning on doing it like in a week or two. And I appreciate you guys being willing to move it up so fast so that we could stream this week on the channel. So
we're the B team.
You're not. You were going to be the A team next week, but you just got to be the B team now.
Okay.
Don't sell yourself short.
Sure.
Temu version or Temu, whatever it is.
Yeah, Temu.
All right. So we're going to be responding to Mr. Deity again, because a while ago he responded to a video I did as part of a series on the Mosaic Law. So he responded to one of the videos, which was more of a theological video. Like that whole point of that video was not even it was more of a theological video, just say the least. Like, hey, how would this work if God does exist and he did give the Bible? That was the point of that whole video. And so what were your guys' thoughts on the two-part videos?
Of your videos?
Well,
or his?
Sure, and his response is what I was thinking.
Well, because remember this, I thought this whole thing was just a ploy to get Zach and I to watch your videos. So.
It didn't work. I only watched half.
You see?
Yeah, well, so with your series, I watched the first one and I was like, oh, this sounds like my approach to a lot of these questions. So I just figured I'd agree with most of the stuff that you say. His videos, it was a big surprise. I felt wanting after watching them because you would just typically either show clips of your videos and then just kind of immediately go back to yapping and saying stuff that really didn't matter, or he wouldn't make any arguments, or he'd connect two dots and then not really make like any inferences. And I'm annoying and want structure and argumentation. It just felt like a big rhetoric battle. That's it.
Well, I would say it seemed like a lot of his arguments would have been dealt with if he would have just watched the full series, or I don't know, read Tom Holland's book Dominion, the book he claimed to be critiquing in other streams, but didn't even read the book up. Oh, that was bad. So yeah, what were your thoughts, Zach?
I thought it was funny, good editing, entertaining. I was like, what am I watching for a lot of it? But a little cringe. Still fun though. So I think a good chance to maybe go into your views a little bit more, or the scholars that you're giving out to your audience, and
well, when I made that series, I find it interesting because like I forget his name. And he didn't want me to mention him, so maybe it's best I don't even say it. But he did a stream on Myth Vision with Josh Bowen, and he was like studying or got some sort of grant. I forget exactly, but I had contacted him and said, "Hey, can you help with this series? Can you give me notes and corrections and stuff?" So like, and I also got input on that series from John Walton. So I was surprised that it was any pushback. I mean, like I thought it was Oh, no.
Oh, I didn't know he was coming. What? What is this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I was like, all right, let's take a look at it. So we're going to review his response. But someone had put in the notes, you want me to present my view, which I thought was a good idea before we get into it. So just take some slides I took from my series. So when it comes to the Mosaic Law, I follow what a lot of scholars talk about it, which is their treatises on judicial wisdom. The current view is that the collection of legal sayings in the ancient Near East, ancient Near Eastern documents, constitutes expressions of legal wisdom assembled under the king's sponsorship to provide evidence of wisdom and justice. These are not laws that have been enacted, nor necessarily rulings that have actually been given. They are treatises on judicial wisdom. We also see that Dilbert Hiller says something very interesting. There's no similar. There is no evidence that any collection of Near Eastern laws function as a written code that was applied by a strict method of exegesis in individual cases. As far as we can tell, these bodies of laws served educational purposes and gave expression to what was regarded as just typical cases, but they left considerable latitude to local courts in determining the right of individual suits. They aided local courts without controlling them. Now, I think back in the spring, I was reading a book on Constantine, and it gave me a good analogy for this. Okay, it's just an analogy, guys. I'm not saying this is exact, but one of the things Constantine did is he made many decrees that suggest a horror show. Like corrupt bureaucrats were to have their hands cut off by the sword. Tax evaders were to be put to death. Informers should be strangled in the very throat, and the tongue of envy cut out from its roots and plucked out. The most colorful punishment was Constantine's revival of the practice of tying an offender in a leather sack and with snakes and throwing the sack into water to drown. He goes on to say, however, it is not entirely clear whether these punishments were ever enforced or whether they were intended to be enforced. Imperial legislation often functioned more as moral exhortation than as code, and Constantine might well have been expressing his disgust at sexual criminals, informants, and corrupt bureaucrats rather than instructing his agents to initiate a bloodbath. So the word exhortation jumped out to me. And that's kind of what I've argued in the past about the Mosaic Law. It was exhortational, didactic. It was expressing the moral importance. So a similar kind of thing. I don't think Constantine would have been happy with tax evaders or people stealing or sexual crimes. But that doesn't mean he was actually going to enact these punishments as it was worded in his own writings. They were more about the exhortational aspect of the code. Similar is the same thing I'd argue is going on with the Mosaic Law, or the Torah, I think is better. Another thing is Kenneth Berglund writes in this book, which I think is a great book. I highly recommend it. A lot of it is critiquing various arguments used for the documentary hypothesis, but there's a great chapter by Berglund in there. He says, to indicate why the Torah should not be understood as legislative, we find substantial indicators in the instructions given specifically to judges. Their Torah, as such, is nowhere explicitly said to be a source of ancient Israelite jurisprudence. In other words, it is not seen as an autonomous legal source with sufficiently comprehensive formulations to regulate, I read the same line, to regulate and sanction the conduct of the people. It is a striking fact that none of the instructions to judges speak of consulting and judging according to the Torah. Instead, the judges are admonished to judge according to more general standard of justice. So I think Walton and his son sum this up pretty well. One is being instructed, is repeatedly enjoined to heed the wisdom that is being conveyed. The expected response to the Torah is far different from the response to legislation. Legislation carries a sense of ought. Instruction carries a sense of you will know. So in summary, what I'm trying to get at is the Torah, as I talked about in my video, The Misunderstood Mosaic Law. One of the things I talked about is that this is wisdom to express the moral importance of what God is trying to teach Israel. It's a treatise on judicial wisdom. It's teaching how justice and wisdom looked like in the ancient Near East. And then you could apply general principles from that. Similar thing we see Paul doing. He says, like, do not muzzle an ox. Okay. He's taking that teaching from the Torah and he's applying it to his later circumstances, that the laborer deserves his wage. He seems to understand it as wisdom literature. And that's kind of what a lot of these scholars are saying about the Torah in general, that it's generally this idea that the Torah was meant to teach what justice would look like, the way they should act in an idealized state. But that doesn't mean the punishments were going to be thrust upon them left and right. There was more in this analogy to what Constantine was doing, expressing the moral importance. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Anything you want to add? You can go ahead, Zach, and then Than, you can follow up.
I do think it's interesting. Bruce Wells, in a lot of his work, he argues that in this time period of ancient law, that when you say, hey, if this happens, kill this person, right? It doesn't always necessarily mean that like every single time that person will actually be killed. That might be the very harshest penalty. So that's something we'll get into. I think it's important to remember. But yeah, I appreciate the summary there.
Yeah, it's like if you said if a father said to his son, if you touch my car, I'll kill you. Like, he obviously isn't. He's just trying to express, hey, there's a rule I really want you to do. Don't do it. So,
yeah.
Anything you guys want to add, or do you want to get into the video?
Let's get into the video. I got nothing.
All right. Let me make this bigger. Go up to theater mode there. Okay. So this is Mr. Deity's response to me. Let's see how he does.
If there is a God, he has to be so
Hold on.
at religious apologists. Because no matter what I do or say to make God look stupid, vicious, and incompetent, I can't even touch what these guys are doing. It's infuriating. I am beyond jealous. I mean, this is my job, right? And they're constantly doing things to try to put me out of work. It's not cool. We're going to be looking at one of Inspiring Philosophy's videos titled The Imperfect Mosaic Law. Not the whole thing. It's long and quite repetitive. And we're going to be jumping around.
It's 16 minutes. If that's long, I feel sorry for him. Like,
because I want to save the best for last. But the point of Michael's video can basically be summed up as follows.
Well, we need to remember the Bible implies in many places that the Torah was not a perfect moral code from God. It contained concessions for stiff-necked Israel.
Okay, so there it is. But why were they stiff-necked, Michael? Huh? Because God failed to give the children of Israel pillow technology.
Ha ha. You guys get it?
I do not. I would love an explanation for that one.
I don't know if you guys have watched The Office, but like the first episode of The Office, I remember watching that and literally like feeling pain from the cringe. And that's how I felt watching this part.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I like that. Yeah. All right, let's keep.
Apparently, God cares about those of us living now far more than he cared about the ancient Hebrews, because he saved another Mike Pillow, for the 21st century. Early on in Mike's video, he makes the following concession to folks like me, which I greatly appreciate.
Let's just say the skeptics are right. The Torah does contain numerous passages that contain immoral ideas.
Again, appreciated, but Michael, there's a huge flocking difference between a perfect moral code and blatantly immoral passages. Who even knew you could be an all-powerful, all-knowing, morally perfect being and leave your people with immoral passages in their holy book? I guess with God, all things really are possible.
Okay, that's the first place I wanted to start. Okay, it's funny that he's responding to this video. That was exactly the thing I was addressing. The reason God gave it as it is not because he was imperfect, but because people are. He seemed to miss the entire point of the video. The point is that God is working with people where they are with their own fallen state. Like that's what human nature entails. And so I've given this example before, like Saudi Arabia. We just can't force them overnight to accept female equality. It's taking time. Let's start by letting them leave the house without male escorts. Let's let women drive. Let's let them have passports. If we tried to go in and do all that, what we wanted immediately, it wouldn't work. And we can see a similar analogy with Iraq. We went in to try to spread democracy. Obviously, it's not doing too well. The same kind of thing. Sometimes where people are in their current state, you just can't magically make them what you want to be if you want them to have free will. What are your guys' thoughts?
Zach, you can go first if you got something.
I don't.
Okay. Just a few things off the top of my head. The first things that I think of whenever these topics come up is like, it's weird because I almost feel like he's just kind of inserting hyper fundamentalism into the equation here.
Yeah.
There's no nuance, it seems like, as with regards to like models of biblical inspiration. What do we actually mean by that? Mm-hmm. Right. So like when he says something like, was this God's best that he could do in your Bible? What I'm really hearing is something along the lines of like, you guys believe God wrote this book, and rather than it being like a dynamic relationship between the two. And that's one consideration I like float around that I'm not gonna like yap about here. And then the other thing is like he seems to imply that this is something God wouldn't do, but then he doesn't really give an argument as to why. He just kind of like puts it onto the ether without it being explicit. So like why should we think that an omnipotent, perfect God cannot do this and would not do this? He doesn't really tell us. So
yeah,
those are the things
I don't.
there.
Well, I also point out, I mean, the laws that Israel was given by God, they couldn't even keep. Like, they get into Canaan, Joshua dies, and they immediately go into idol worship. Like, so it's like, yet we are to think God is supposed to give them some sort of moral perfect law, and they couldn't even keep the limited compromise laws they were given. It doesn't follow that. I was like, okay, well, like, obviously the laws they were given, they couldn't even do that. So why should we expect him to, or why should we have expected God in his omniscience to give them an even harder law to keep? So, all right, let's move on to the next section.
Michael then adds to his main point.
But also, God admits the Torah was never meant to be a perfect moral code.
Where does God admit that the Torah was never meant to be a perfect moral code? Michael's going to quote the book containing God's imperfect moral code to tell us that God admits that it was not God's perfect moral code. But exactly how do we know that's God's admission? I mean, this book is clearly not perfect, right?
Okay, so here we have a problem. He's conflating moral ideas with truths, like objective truths given by God. So you can say that the Bible has is factual if it's given by God, and it can still contain compromised moral laws. He seems to have conflated those two. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, he definitely does. I think he's also just conflating internal external critiques here, because I think your video was made on the premise that this is like an internal dialectic, not an external one. And I think he's like conflating the purpose of the codes and all this other stuff too. I don't think God's intention was to portray like absolute moral truths. I think, kind of like what William Webb says in his book, he's intending to move the lines of scrimmage progressively over time. And again, just kind of like on a philosophical end, he's just kind of like throwing things out into the ether, not really making any explicit claims, but making implications. And it sounds like he's pretty much just saying something along the lines of like, premise one, the Bible contains concessions from gods to humans on immoral things. There's some hidden assumption that's your second premise that he's not explicit about. So his conclusion is then the Bible isn't perfect and we can't use it to understand what God wants to do with people. And I'm like, you got to do more work than that. You can't just, I don't know. So there's not much else to say here, but it seems like a pretty recurring theme is going to be that he's going to say things and not really argue for them.
Right. Again, the whole conflation thing here, you can say that the Bible contains truths, and some of those truths are that some of the laws that God gave were because Israel's heart was hard. Like in the actual video, I quoted Jesus saying the law of divorce was given because your hearts were hard. So like noting that some of the laws that were given were because Israel was sinful, that does not mean that the word of God that was given in that is somehow imperfect. It's a weird conflation.
Yeah. Yeah, Then you mentioned the topic of internal and external. So we have to like put this conversation in a framework. So Michael, one, he's like, trying to describe what the text is, like what the purpose of it is. But in some ways, this is also like a response to people like Mr. Deity, who's like, hey, the Old Testament is bad law that's not good. But Michael's, what he's doing is he's like that objection is, basically comparing that with, like the New Testament and stuff, like where it talks about, God being great and loving and stuff like that. So like, how does that work? So when you say like an internal, I think a good analogy would be helpful here. So like, imagine if you're reading a book and the book has certain rules or guidelines that it follows. Like, for example, in a fantasy book, if the characters can fly, but one character suddenly can't fly without explanation, you might think, wait, that doesn't make any sense with what I know about this world. Like that person, he should be able to fly. Like, what's going on here? And that contradicts with other parts of the book. So, Mike, what you're doing is you're pointing out something that, someone else, I guess, is saying they're pointing out things that don't make sense with the book. Likewise, if someone said about the book, oh, but how do I know that the character existed at all in real life? Well, that's not an internal critique. That's an external critique. You're not playing with the rules of the book. So,
Right.
Mike, your response is playing with the rules of the book. So, how does that work with the other rules of the book? We're talking about like the New Testament and stuff like that. So that's why the response here doesn't really make much sense for the whole conversation that's going on.
Yeah. All right, let's continue on.
Any chance it was not God's perfect moral code because it was, I don't know, maybe invented by stupid, ignorant humans living in a time of moral ignorance, and that was simply the best they could do? Rather than the Torah being divine instructions from a morally perfect being? This is a good example of how believing without sufficient evidence leads to a chain of reasoning that has absolutely no grounding or sense whatsoever. Michael confidently says that God admits the Torah is not God's perfect moral code, and his evidence is nothing more than people saying God said it as an.
Okay, so he's switching between an internal critique and an external critique, which shows how desperate he has to be here. Okay, the video he's responding to is addressing an internal critique, and he's saying, well, how do we even trust the words that are being listed here? Okay, well, if it was actually written by stupid people, it would just make it all the more miraculous, given that this is the book that is the primary basis for Western culture and the most influential book in the world. Like, I don't understand why atheists make this argument. Like, this just comes from stupid Iron Age goat herders. Okay, then it makes it all the more miraculous, given how influential it's been and how much it has changed the world. Like, you're shooting yourself in the foot here.
I was going to say, it's not actually a mutually exclusive hypothesis. God was also interacting with these Bronze Age goat herders. I heard this part, and like the inner philosopher in me was just like kind of losing my mind, because he presents this as if like it's a, like you said, first of all, it's an external critique, not an internal anymore. That's fine. He presents this as a counter hypothesis that this is just morally corrupt humans who made this, and that's his hypothesis. And then he has a caption saying Occam's razor, implying that the prior probability of his hypothesis is going to be higher than the prior probability of ours. Again, doesn't really tell us why. But then I think just if you take, in order to say that, what you're going to have to do is like do what he does, which is ignore the totality of the evidence, ignore all the arguments that we give. Otherwise, what he's going to have to do is come up with a bunch of ad hoc auxiliary hypotheses. And next thing you know, he has a really complicated theory on his hand, not a simple one. And so what's the simpler theory? That God exists and he interacted with the Israelites and this is how he did it? Or all these ad hoc theories that he's going to have to deal with and insert in order to get rid of the Christian evidence? Once you actually do the work and get past the rhetoric that he's throwing out, you realize that this dialectic is not where he thinks it is.
All right, let's continue on.
Example, Michael says Jesus said X about the law of Moses, confirming the point.
In Matthew 19, the Pharisees come and attempt to trick Jesus by asking him a question about the law of divorce.
Yada, yada, yada. So Michael's evidence is that Jesus said X about the law, but did he?
Case in point, Mike.
Some anonymous non-eyewitness said, telling us what someone else allegedly said Jesus said, writing decades later after all kinds of legendary development has taken place. Of course, Michael never thinks about that because he swallowed all of this nonsense hook, line, and sinker. But let's look again at the...
Okay. Yeah. He can't, he's got to shift between internal critique, external critique. Okay, it's like, hey, if you're addressing an internal critique as a Christian, the atheist just says, well, how can you even trust those words? It's like, dude, pick a narrative.
10 seconds of work would have answered this question. He could have just went to the rest of your channel and seen that you've done work on this.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Zach?
Well, I think that's like true in some way. I think that he would reject those other arguments that you make or whatever, maybe even not even think they're worth it. But basically what he's saying, he's like, I know, well, maybe he doesn't know, but like there are plenty of videos out there that argue for like the reliability of the Bible or something like that. But he's like, going to this video and he's saying, hey, there's no evidence that is trustworthy, when like he should be responding to those videos on those topics, instead of on this topic that has nothing to do with it.
Speaking of that, ladies and gentlemen, just so you know, I'm almost done with the series on the reliability of the Gospels. The next one will be out next week. So in 8 days, title is John, an eyewitness account. Then I'll do another one called the historical reliability of the Gospels, because I'm going to include some additional data. Then I'm going to do one kind of like an appendix, just dealing with an objection that pops up a lot online. So yeah, so just shameless plug there. Okay, let's continue on here.
Choice Michael offers us to see which one makes more sense. We have a perfectly moral God giving humans what Michael admits is an imperfect moral code, or an imperfect moral code invented by morally imperfect humans. Which seems more likely? Can you do the math on that one and see how the two imperfects align perfectly? Whereas the perfect and the imperfect just butt heads like nobody's business. Is it really that hard? Or is the math just so difficult when you really want something to be true, when it's objectively stupid?
I felt hurt.
So
he's making me laugh. He gets points for that.
Fan, you gotta put it together.
So
this is how you make our. You know, next time I have a debate, I'm just gonna look at my interlocutor and just go, "Okay, you know what? That's all."
So again, this is we've hit this to the we've hit this over the head, but no one is arguing from this that Christianity is true. We use other arguments. These are objections then leveled against Christianity that we use to show, and we do that are basically internal critiques, and we say, hey, that doesn't work here. Here's why. Here's why. Here's why. So like this has nothing to do with what worldview is more likely to be true.
Yeah, he just turned it into that. But then, even then, is it that hard to make an argument? Like, I can let me just rehash his own logic here. I'm gonna take the words that he said here and say, I mean, when you really, really don't want something to be true, it's really easy to just act like the opposing side is dumb and that there's no match.
Mm-hmm.
So don't you see the crazy tension here? Like, we can both do that. So like, why is it that we should accept what he's saying as his counter over what you said? He doesn't really tell us.
Mm-hmm.
I might have missed it. Did he say something about Jesus being legendary?
Yeah, he said that earlier, like the statements of Jesus being legendary. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I do wonder what, maybe he has more of the cringier views on Jesus, but like yeah, all kinds of, the most skeptical New Testament scholars think Jesus, like, specifically, like, said lots of things in the gospel. So kind of odd that he'd be like super hyper skeptical that Jesus would say what you mentioned in the video. And also we have other New Testament writers saying the same thing about the law of the Old Testament. So even if Jesus doesn't specifically mention it, we do have other writers.
Mm-hmm. All right, I got the next section here up. Let's go ahead and play it.
Modified in ways that God did not initially want, or could be modified for just reasons.
This is as human as it gets, folks. Keep moving, because there's absolutely nothing transcendent to see here. Imagine an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-just God who doesn't get what he initially wants, and apparently doesn't know at some earlier point that he's not going to get what he wants. And again, apparently, those just reasons, the reasons God allowed the Torah to be modified by the Hebrews, never included forbidding slavery or honor killings. Apparently, those things were and are just.
So he seems to be assuming that if God is omnipotent, he gets to determine everything. Like, he's basically arguing if God is allowing free will, like he can't. I don't understand what he's trying to say here, because it's just so weird. What are your thoughts?
I just think he's being overly reductive about really nuanced philosophical and theological topics.
Yeah.
And relying on that reductionism to make silly arguments at the end of the day. Like, if God's all powerful and all knowing, he should be able to get what he wants, but he doesn't get what he wants. And then I'm just going to stop talking there and let you pick up the puzzle pieces, kind of a thing. I just don't really know exactly. Like, I want to steel man him, but I don't really know what exactly he's trying to poke at here either.
Yeah, it just seems like if God's omnipotent, he should always get what he wants. But that's not what omnipotence means.
Yeah.
So it's a very weird argument. Like an omnipotent being can make concessions with less powerful beings if he chooses to. So weird. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Zach?
Yeah, so he basically says the text is as human as it gets, which was interesting phrasing, basically saying like, you know, it's human, it's bad because that's what humans do, right? And he's implying that there's no supernatural aspect to it, which is interesting because even in your videos, you spend a lot of time arguing that there are lots of scholars that think the Old Testament law has a lot of things that seem to be a lot better than the humans of the time. And you seem to argue, hey, you know, that seems to be really interesting, considering, you know, you also think that a God wrote them or helps write them or work together with the humans to do it. But some of those examples are they're more against racism. They have commands for better care for the helpless and the weak. So we're talking about like the Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians. There's lots of laws that when you compare that with the Torah looks a lot better. There are commands to give more to the poor. They placed human life as more valuable than property. So a lot of these Babylonian laws, they seem to think that like someone's house is more important than someone's actual life. While the Bible doesn't, or the Torah does not do that. There's better treatment of slaves in many texts. In Exodus 22, this is a really interesting one because it seems to be the first law code of this time period to encourage not just following the law, but being a good person in general. So it's one thing to give someone laws and be like, don't do this. And it's like, well, I can do whatever I want. I could do, you know, anything immoral, but I just have to follow the law. I just don't have to get in trouble. But the Exodus 22 it seems to be saying, according to a lot of scholars, that it is basically saying, hey, you should do a good person. And the reason we know that is this is one example, although there's many verses in this text. It says, Exodus 22:29, it says, you shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses. So like, this is a law that there's no way for a government to enforce this. How do you punish someone for not giving out their harvest to other people, like the leftover food that they have? It's like, oh shoot, you know, you waited 2 minutes to give out your food. You're in big trouble this time, mister. No. Like you can't do that. And it's like, how do you even have evidence of that? So yeah, many scholars think the purpose of the law is just to create a person who is good rather than someone who's just trying to avoid punishment. And Desmond Alexander's Exodus Apollos commentary talks about that a little bit more. But here, there's more. So Mr. Deity, he essentially says that if the Torah was just, God would have removed slavery and honor killing. So this one's really interesting because, one, he says that apparently those things are just according to you, which is obviously not something that you would hold. And earlier he pointed out how you don't think it's like the Torah is just some like super perfect law according to today's standards. So it seems like he understood your view in that time period, but not this part of the video. So that's weird. But I think it's important to answer these questions even if you have a view that can support why you know, it seems like there are bad laws. There's still a question of like, why would God do that? Because things like slavery, these seems like really bad. He mentions honor killings. Honor killings is a real one, a weird one. I'm not exactly sure what he means by that. He just like a throwaway phrase. But if he's thinking of Deuteronomy 22:20-21, I've looked a lot into this. I don't think it's an honor killing. And a good article on this is Sex, Lies, and Virginal Rape, the Slandered Bride and False Accusation in Deuteronomy by Bruce Wells. And he's not a conservative scholar. But on slavery, I think this one's pretty obvious once you look into it just a little bit. On one hand, it's like slavery, oh, that's really, really bad, right? Like, how could God do that? At the same time, once we look at their culture, why slavery was important is like, it helped run the economy. Like in this world where so much is reliant on crops and making sure everybody has food. If according to the text, this is a new nation, and you're someone like Mr. Deity would basically be saying no slavery for this new nation, and even in a normal nation like Babylon or Egypt or whatever, like that would cripple the economy. That would, like, if you don't give the nation enough food, that would literally end lives. So this is him saying that if we have to get rid of slavery, it would be the equivalent of saying, hey, like, it's okay if these people die just as long as there's no slavery. Now that's obviously not something that he would claim, but those are the logical entailment of that. And I think a perfect example of this is what happened in America, the Civil War. Like, people finally decided, hey, maybe we shouldn't do slavery. And there was an entire war with thousands and thousands of people killed because of it. So, yeah, I don't think the Israelites would be too willing to accept that. Also, I don't think that would work out to begin with.
And again, the Israelites couldn't even keep the limited amount of laws they were given. Like,
yep.
So if God is omniscient, he knew that there was no point in giving them an even better law at that point. Plus, I always find it weird, and this is something I'm going to be doing a video on in 2025, but we keep saying the Bible is pro-slavery. Really, the book that ended slavery, the book that was primarily crucial for ending slavery. I've been reading like 8 or 9 books on this. It's like, it's pretty clear that when you go back to the 1700s, 1800s, the primary motivation for ending slavery was the Bible, was Christians arguing from the Bible. No one was arguing from Hume or Voltaire or, one of the guys I even read said there were rationalist deistic arguments against slavery, but they had failed by the end of the 1700s. They had failed. And what revitalized the anti-slavery movement, the abolitionist movement, was Christians. It was Methodists. It was Northern Baptists. It was, Quakers as well. They were working against this idea because what were they inspired by? Biblical text. So it's very weird. We're mad at the book that ended slavery and we're saying it's pro-slavery. It's like, okay, if God does exist and you're doing this internal critique, if God was pro-slavery, why did he inspire a book that ended slavery? Okay, if we're doing these theological attacks, these internal critiques, that needs to be answered. Maybe God knew something about human psychology in early human cultures and knew that blanket statements about abolishing slavery in cultures that just assumed it was a standard norm weren't going to work. And he had to slowly erode it from within cultures itself. And eventually that's what happened. That's just the human history in and of itself. So very weird argument. But yeah, I'll save a lot of that research I've been saving up for the later video I want to do. All right, let me play the next section here.
Some of the passages come from requests by Israelites.
So the all-knowing God of the universe had a suggestion box, for stuff he couldn't figure out on his own.
Oh my God. Okay. Yes. First of all, God had a suggestion box because as I said in the video, your hearts were hard. That's why you were given a law of divorce. It's not because he couldn't figure it out. It's because God has always been a God who wants to work with his people. This is in Genesis 1. You subdue the earth in my name. You, my image bearers, subdue the earth. Like, why is it that if God wants to work with creatures, he's got to lack omniscience or omnipotence? He just can't be like, hey, he wants to have relationships.
Do I lack the power to subdue my children when I ask them, hey, where do you want to go fishing? Like, I'm taking my kids fishing on Saturday. Does that mean that I just lack authority as a father and power, like physical power over them even, because I want to give them a choice and have them be part of the process of planning the fishing trip?
Obviously, that has to be the only thing.
I'm just a horrible father, I guess, and my 5-year-old's stronger than I am. So,
yeah. All right, let's continue on.
Good to know.
Now, because Israel was a high context society, it is not always stated if God approved of each passage or if he was allowing something to be included to compromise with Israel.
From the pre-Exodus stories in the Bible, does it seem like God would be the type to compromise? Adam and Eve, not knowing good from evil, disobeyed God in the most benign way, and God screwed us all with a sinful nature. He cast them and all of us out of paradise into...
Okay, if you read the Pentateuch, He does. It's like he's like, hey, Moses, the Israelites are rebelling. I'm going to wipe out and start over. And Moses is like, no. All right, fine. I'll work with you. Hey, he wrestles with Jacob so that Jacob can demand a blessing. Like he has Abraham go with him and says allows Abraham to plead with him. Hey, if you find 10 righteous, will you spare Sodom and Gomorrah? He's like, yes. Like, yes, God wants to work with humans. I don't understand what if he's even read the Bible at this point. Like there's several examples of this.
Yeah. Well, I think at the very beginning of it, I mean, just because God doesn't compromise in some situations wouldn't mean he doesn't compromise in other situations, right? Maybe you can make a probabilistic thing like, oh, he's not doing it over here, so he's probably not doing it over there. But, you know, that doesn't necessarily follow, right? And he mentioned the garden, so that's a fun one, right? So God says, you know, you will die if you eat from the fruit, and then they don't die. It's really interesting. I actually had Bruce Wells on my channel to talk about this interesting conundrum. And one interesting possibility is that God, he essentially compromised. He was like, you know, that is the maximum punishment, but, you know, I'll let you guys off the hook. So that doesn't necessarily, like that specific text of the garden, like that's I don't see how that's so strong evidence for that. You know, it's like it seems bad, and so does the flood and Sodom and Gomorrah. That sure, but that doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't like a compromiser. And I shouldn't phrase it like that. Wasn't a compromiser. That sounds like Answers in Genesis, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's again, God wants to work with creatures because he's a relational being. He's going to, and I remember reading the philosopher Keith Ward on this. Like some people think that because God is morally perfect, he has got like one good future in plan. But Ward was like, okay, God has an end goal he wants to get to, but there are probably multiple good paths he could use to get there that are equally good, and he allows humans to participate in what path we go down. So we got to stop thinking as if like there's just one good possible future. Given what we know about reality and existence, there could be multiple good futures, and God allows us to participate in the reality we bring about in this world. So odd argument. All right, you guys ready to move to the second video?
Yep.
All right, let's do this.
It's not a perfect moral code, that it was necessarily bad. We are simply noting the Torah was not meant to be universal moral legislation, and it was cultural wisdom for that time and place. In other words, it was perfect for where the people were spiritually, in that time and place, within that culture, but not meant to be moral wisdom or rules for all people or all cultures.
A light unto the nations. Actually, no, more like just another nation without any transcendent guidance, embracing and proliferating some really immoral ideas like slavery, genocide, homophobia, and misogyny.
Okay, well, if he would have watched the full series, he would see that part 3, the revolutionary Mosaic Law, makes a case that there are aspects that basically change the ancient culture into what we have today. So Jean Bottero makes a really interesting point here. It says, did morality, honest and righteous behavior, have an authentic religious and cultural value, a place in the practice of religion, a direct influence on the gods? We have never found any response in all of our documentation to such a question that we ask ourselves from our own religious and biblical point of view. The ancient Mesopotamians never overtly concerned themselves with or imagined such preoccupations, which are so familiar to us. This must have been one of Moses' great revolutions in Israel, to replace the purely material maintenance of the gods with the single and sole liturgical obligation in life to obey a moral law, thereby truly rendering to God the only homage worthy of him. So I remember Karl van der Toorn was talking about the Babylonians, and they didn't have a sense of integrity or internal guilt. Everything was about honor and shame. In Israel, we start to see this idea fostered. We start to see idea of like personal guilt, integrity, located morality in the character of God. So it started to make right and wrong more about your relationship to God, not if you brought honor to the community. Eitrot, I think that's how you say his last name. The norms given in the Book of the Covenant reveal, when compared with related law books of the ancient Near East, radical alterations in legal practice. The evaluation of offense against property, in the treatment of slaves, and the fixing of punishments for indirect offenses, and the rejection of punishment by mutilation. The value of human life is recognized as incomparably greater than all other material values. One more. I just was reading this Joshua Berman's paper recently, and he notes some very interesting things that are showing up in the book of Deuteronomy. He says central to many Republican schemes, including that of Deuteronomy, is the notion of a mixed government and a degree of separation of powers. The idea that the effective division of powers was predicated upon its distribution among pre-existing societal seats of power, such as nobles and commoners, was one that would hold sway throughout most of the history of Republican thought. Sorry for the copy and paste issues. For some reason, it made my O's P's sometimes. From classical theorists through early modern thinkers as well. For Montesquieu, what separates modern from despotic regimes more than anything else is the independence of the judiciary, whose members are drawn from the people. It is remarkable that Deuteronomy accords with this. The judiciary, unlike the other seats of power, is chosen exclusively by human agents. You shall appoint magistrates and clerks from your tribes in all your settlements that the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. So one of the things he notes in this paper, as well as Bernard Levinson notes similar things as well, is that Deuteronomy has this idea of like a separation of powers, not a centralized authority figure. Like even Levinson notes that like if Israel in Deuteronomy says, if you're going to bring about a king, they have such a limited power. They're limited with the kind of wealth they can have, the amount of horses they can have. And Deuteronomy is pushing this idea of separation of powers. It has very interesting ideas that are unprecedented. Like Berman says, this idea about how it's like doing the separation of powers is unprecedented in the ancient Near East at the time. So there's a lot more we could say on that. What if you guys want to chime in and add anything else you're thinking of? But I mean, I covered a lot of that in the video, The Revolutionary Mosaic Law. So yeah, we could say that, yeah, it is a compromise with Israel, but even with that, it is still moving the people forward in certain ways, like with its idea of integrity and other aspects.
Yeah. So what's the payoff there? What's the big significance there for your audience? That
There
it's
is
revolutionary.
There are aspects of it that do seem to be moving humanity forward. And again, we see this now. Like, again, the book Dominion that he didn't read shows how Judeo-Christian values have transformed the world. We now look at all humans as equal because of the things we learned in the Bible. We now look at like slavery as problematic because of abolitionist Christian drawing from the Bible about how we're all brothers, how we're all equal, that no man can own another. I mean, the first person to ever suggest slavery should be abolished was a Christian, Gregory of Nyssa. Where was he arguing that from? Okay. So, I mean, like, it did have revolutionary aspects to sort of like push this idea we talk about with moral progress. Okay, I'm going to help humanity along this path to get them to a better place. The Torah is one step. Sure, there are aspects that we don't think are good, but again, it's a compromise. It's the same thing with like what the British did in the 1800s in India. They outlawed marriage under the age of 12. The Hindus and the Muslims rioted. The Brits wanted it to be higher, but this was a compromise. They're trying to say, hey, let's get rid of child marriage slowly. And then we see over the next couple of decades, they did make it higher. So, I mean, like, it's the same kind of mentality there.
I got nothing to add on this.
So the big point there is, it seems like Mr. Deity, he doesn't see that nuance there, that how revolutionary it was, and that's therefore really important for this conversation. Yeah,
you could say that there are aspects of it that really do stand out that scholars like Jean Bottero, John Walton have noted. So, all right, let's continue on.
Michael, yes, we to God for any of that. Cultural wisdom for that time and place just happens naturally, all by itself. In fact, I think it's.
But again, if you check out the revolutionary aspects of it, there is more to go. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit there since we're just going to get kind of repetitive. Yet.
Apparently, we still aren't ready for God's perfect universal moral code because God hasn't updated anything significantly since, aside from having his boy/self tortured and killed. And isn't Jesus' sacrifice proof that we'd never be ready for God's perfect moral code, that we'd never be able to live up to it? It's not like we even lived up to God's imperfect moral code. So why not just give us the perfect moral code for guidance, both now and later, since we were bound to fail regardless? God.
Okay, maybe I'm missing something, but it sounds like he just debunked himself. Like he just admitted humans can't keep it regardless. So like, what's the point? Like,
yep, that's exactly what just happened. Which goes it ties into like the philosophical blunders of the video, right? It's like I don't think he's actually tracking what you're saying. And I think that shows by the fact that he's contradicting himself and saying things that actually like coincide very neatly with what you're saying, which is what he just did.
Yeah, and he says, like, why did God just give it to us anyway? Well, we could argue that the New Testament lays down a form of virtue ethics, as Than and I have argued, which allows for enough moral progress that is still constrained by certain principles to keep one from, going off in crazy directions. And again, the testament of history shows that Christianity has created a lot of moral progress, a lot of scientific progress. Like, I read a book over the summer, Christian Human Rights, how Christianity gave rise to human rights. Have a bunch of other books I need to read as well on that. So, I mean, like, you could make the case that when we get to the New Testament, we get a form of virtue ethics laid down, which allows for enough moral progress to start to make actual human progress. So,
yeah. Well, there's a long list of stuff you can mention here, right? So, people talk about how like the Old Testament's so bad, but like the New Testament, like it's got some pretty obviously like great stuff. So like the Sermon on the Mount, it's like super really wise sayings for just like from an ethical perspective. Paul, when he addresses women in household codes, when you look at other texts of the time period, like women weren't addressed, they weren't seen as worth addressing. It conveys an inherent worth in women. The New Testament treats slaves a lot better than the people of the time period normally do. There's the whole passage, neither male nor female, slave nor free in Christ. Like that's clearly like a reference to equality. And a good reference on that is William Webb, Slaves, Women, and Homosexuals. I also did an interview with him on that topic.
Yeah, and that was one of the passages the abolitionists use a lot.
Huh, yeah, that's fun. Yeah. All right. But yeah, the idea we see in the New Testament is that God is not doing away with these old bad laws, right? But he's calling us to embody the Old Testament of what the text was getting at. In this way, God has actually given us the moral law, it could be argued. So he says that like it hasn't been given, but it has, and that kind of ties. I think it really interacts really nicely with your idea of virtue ethics, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would really like, and this is a side issue, but I'd really like to see the actual argument that somehow the Bible didn't inspire the abolitionist movement. Like it came from somewhere else, because like where else did it come from? Like I've been trying to read to see what those actual arguments are. And, if you go back to like enlightened thinkers like David Hume or Voltaire, they were pro-slavery and benefiting off the slave trade. You go back to the ancient world. I mean, the Stoics didn't condemn slavery. The first people to start condemning slavery, again, were Christians, Gregory and Nyssa the first. Now, were there Christians that were pro-slavery and used the Bible? Yes. But literally every human up until very, very recently thought slavery was normal. All of a sudden within Christianity, sure, there were plenty of Christians that were pro-slavery, but all of a sudden within Christianity, there was a movement that created the abolitionist movement, and then it became the standard norm as it is today. Given the vast amount of cultures just thinking it was normal, like why all of a sudden did a group of Christians start deciding that it wasn't, and it was a sin and should be abolished? It's a very interesting historical conundrum here, and a lot of the scholars I'm reading are saying, well, there were specific things in the Bible that made them think this way. They're not. Now they do know there were other reasons they used to end slavery, but the most crucial one was biblical passages. All right, let me play the next section here.
God, revealing his perfect moral code 3,000 plus years ago, whether humanity was ready for it or not, would have given humans in the future reason to believe that the Israelites were indeed communicating with a morally transcendent being. God.
Okay, so then I got a question for him here, and I wonder what your guys' thoughts are on this. So let's talk about this. So if God gives the Hebrews a Torah and then adds the New Testament later, okay, could that actually be, based on his own reasoning, an argument for God's existence? Because we would expect God to give something to humans that would actually create moral progress and change humanity in drastic ways for the better. It's very, very obvious, given a lot of the research I have cited and will be citing in the future. Christianity has drastically changed human nature for the better, changed a lot of things about it. So it's like if he's conceding that, I guess we could use a lot of the research to show this is an actually an argument for God's existence, that the Christian God is real.
Exactly.
Maybe he'll see this and convert.
Maybe he should watch the stream I did replying to him on Tom Holland's book Dominion, because I cited a lot of that research there.
That, and just here's my problem with this. It's presumably Mr. Deity would agree that if God exists, he'd be like a perfectly rational being. And he also wants to say something like a perfectly rational being would give a perfect moral code to people that are flawed, that he knows necessarily will not follow that perfect moral law and cannot follow that perfect moral law. So he wants God to do an irrational act, even though he's presumably supposed to be a perfectly rational creature. In other words, like, the expectations he's trying to draw out from theism to what God would and wouldn't do are actually contradictory, which should tell you something about the way he's trying to do like his natural theology. I don't know if that made sense, but like, there's so much inconsistency.
Yeah. All right, let's play the next section here, and then we're gonna get to some super chats.
It was perfect for where the people were spiritually, in that time and place, within that culture, but not meant to be moral wisdom or rules for all people or all cultures.
Okay, so these last two comments about humanity not being ready for God's perfect moral code, and the code God did give not being for all peoples or cultures, brings us to the heart of the tribal war god of Abraham's stupidity, viciousness, and incompetence. Michael is not a young earth creationist. So if we're going to go with Lobar Bill's assessment, humans with souls have been around since Homo heidelbergensis, 750,000 years ago. If we're just talking about modern humans, we're still looking at up to 300,000 years. That's a long time. So why weren't humans ready yet? Some 3,000 years ago for God's perfect moral code. God had 300,000 years to prep us?
Okay, so a lot of assumptions here that are just not justified. He's assuming that God wasn't possibly working with early humans in some ways. It just has knowledge that's been lost to us because they didn't have systems of writing back then. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues there. Also, humans' brains were still developing and growing. We see evidence of various monotheistic cultures around the world. Check out, for example, Wilhelm Schmidt's work or Andrew Lang's work. So, I mean, like, a lot of issues here on what he's saying. What are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just a philosophical assumption is that 300,000 years is like a lot of time, and it might seem relatively like a lot of time. But what, like, why should I think that that's going to be like evidentially probative? Like, give me an actual reason other than Mr. Deity just feels like it is. Right? Like, I just do the hard work. I know I sound like a broken record here, but
well, if you're going to say that God wasn't, you mean he seems to be saying that God wasn't working with humans before Adam and Eve. That's an assumption that's not justified.
Right. Like, why should I think that?
Yeah.
I'm happy he understands that you're not a young earth creationist. So that's like, he did his research. Aha.
You see? Yeah. Well,
you see?
Well, that's good at least. So, all right, let's move on to the next section here.
They never knew that God had a plan for their lives and that God loved them. He left them to be atheists. And if
that's right, folks, ancient humans were atheists. That's right. No, one anthropologist who has made that claim that most humans we've found around the world believe in something supernatural. I remember reading a book.
To say. I really don't know what to say to that. Like,
yeah, I read a book by Lester Hyatt, who's an anthropologist in Australia. He notes that a lot of the Aboriginal tribes there had belief in a high creator deity, what would be perceived as very developed theology among tribes that basically have lived very simple hunter-gatherer lifestyles for a while. Same in Africa, same in the Americas. Others have reported that as well. So, I mean, like, what is he even talking about atheists here? I don't know.
It's really funny that he did that, actually, because now I'm just thinking about the fact that throughout these two videos, he's said a lot of stuff about how, like, you throughout your videos say a bunch of stuff with really flimsy evidence and yada yada. He just presented no evidence for that claim. Like, he's just expecting his audience to take him at face value for that.
Yeah. All right, let's play the last section here, and then we'll get to some super chats.
That explains why we do not find in the Torah any discussion of, is it a good thing to have slaves? Those aren't issues on the table in the ancient world.
Mm-hmm.
And Torah is not going to deal with them. It's not presenting an ideal system. It's telling them how to live in the system that exists in their day. There's no discussion about whether democracy might be a more humane government than monarchy. We talked about this some yesterday. There's no discussion of whether patriarchy and male domination is a sensible thing. That's how it was in the ancient world. God wasn't trying to create a new social system for them. He was trying to tell them how to live without reproach in the systems that existed.
There's no discussion of those things in the Gospels or the epistles either. So clearly, this is how we should view the New Testament as well. God still has yet to give us his ideal, perfect moral code. The New Testament was simply telling people how to live in the system that existed in their day.
So the difference is that the New Testament is actually laying down a system of virtue ethics. Holy crap, Moses showed up.
What? Where is he? Shoot!
I'll let you get away with it, Sarah, but only because it's October.
Well, why don't we wait? If Moses is here, why don't we just have him answer all these questions for us?
Yeah, Moses.
I can verify. It's God's book. It is. The rest doesn't matter. Don't be like the Israelites.
How did you change so fast?
Who did? What?
All right, you got me. So again, the video he's responding to is about the Torah specifically, and I've argued elsewhere the New Testament is different. It's actually laying down a system of virtue ethics, which we can derive moral guidance from. We can develop a thing like just war theory from the principles it lays out that can transcend and create moral progress and go beyond that. So yeah, the New Testament doesn't give you politics or just war theory, but if you have a system of virtue ethics, you have something to build upon, which the New Testament does give. Any thoughts on that, Moses?
I said my piece. Trust the Bible.
Than?
No, there's not too much to say on this, just because there's not like, I just feel like there wasn't too much substance to like really dig into here. So
yeah. Well, which is funny because, like, again, I saw his videos being promoted left and right as like the end all be all guy who refuted Tom Holland. And I was like, what? It's like, that's why I started looking at him again. And then I found this response and I'm like, okay, let's just show how shallow this is, or not substance here, as you were saying. So, all right. Thank you, Anikit, Alex, for becoming a channel member. Much appreciated. Apollo's Christian Apologetics says, atheism equal good. Why didn't they give a perfect law before?
Good question.
Yeah. Not sure if I fully understand the full question.
I think he's just parroting the argument Mr. Deity's giving, which is like, oh, you have this perfect God. Why didn't he give a perfect law? And the parrot's like, atheists want to say that atheism is good for humanity. Why don't atheists give a perfect moral law?
Yeah, well, I should be having a debate early November with a sociologist on which is better for humanity, Christianity or secularism. I have some good data I want to bring up. I've been wanting this debate to happen for years, so I'm glad it's finally happening.
You should consult with Matt Dillahunty.
Yeah, about that.
I've heard he's good.
Thank you for becoming a channel member. However you pronounce that, probably some European name. I only know how to pronounce American names. I'm so bad at pronouncing names.
Vorsakai.
You know, the problem is English fools me all the time. Like, you can read a book. You could have read a book. They're spelled the same way. So I just look at words sometimes and I'm like, okay, what is English throwing me off with? Like ear, EAR, but if you put a B in front of it, it's bear. Like, I can't trust this language. I can't. So I look at names and my brain is like panicking. Okay, I know I'm going to pronounce this wrong.
It was also difficult for me.
Pretty sure David Hume was racist and pro-slavery. Yeah, actually, let me put up a slide. I got something from my last. I think this is it. My last stream.
While you're pulling that up, that guy Ortuga said that how I said it is how you're supposed to say it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is so David Hume was not a oh boy. So David Hume, in Hume's case, the history and morality of this matter is clear. Hume was an unashamed racist who was directly involved in the slave trade, and he said some pretty bad things. Yeah. I don't even know if I want to repeat it because I don't want YouTube to take the stream down. But yeah, he was not like people like the funny thing is when I responded to Mr. Deity a few weeks ago, he was trying to claim that he tried to claim like enlightened thinkers like Hume and Voltaire is saying like, we're different from you Christians. So I brought up some of these quotes and going, really? These are the guys you want to claim are the people that inspired your modern humanistic ways of thinking and values? I wouldn't do that if I were you. Very bad stuff here. So again, that's what a lot of enlightened thinkers were saying at the time. Meanwhile, Quakers are running around going around the same time, hey, we should get rid of slavery because the Bible is against it. No. Did you just hear my cat scream?
I was worried that was my baby crying. Okay, thanks for confirming it wasn't.
Oh, he comes over and yells at me and demands I pick him up. What? He's a noisy animal. Yeah, well, you wanted it. He wants me to pick him up, and then he gets mad when I pick him up. It's a cat thing.
It's a cat, yeah.
The first time you engaged with Mr. Deity, I had an exchange with him on his channel where he conceded many points about the Bible in the Dark Ages. Seeing him now knowingly push false info is concerning. Yeah. Was that last year when you and I responded to him, Than, on this channel?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, he was, same kind of stuff. Pushing things like the Dark Ages, which is well known to be a hugely myth blown out of proportion. A lot of issues there. Hopefully he stops pushing that kind of stuff. Well, let me get to the next one here. This is from your channel.
Oh,
I gave money for the Moses. Is that why you went and put it on?
There's no way to know for sure. Really, no way. It's just a coincidence.
Is that how I gotta get you? Is if I want you to do something for me, I just gotta throw money at you?
I'm a sellout.
So I see what you're saying here is like if I put super chat in, you'll just take clothes off if I ask. Is that what
oh shoot, that would not be Moses like. No. But maybe David, huh?
Yeah.
No one put a super chat in and tell Moses to take his clothes off because he might be tempted to. Justin IP claims David Hume was not a boy. What did I say something?
I don't know. I must have missed it.
Maybe I don't know who knows what I said. If I did, I don't know. Sometimes I misspeak when I'm doing streams. So I'm sorry, Tim. I'm not sure what you're exactly referring to there. All right. I'm like concerned now that I said something weird.
Look at his comment.
He said he was not own boy.
Oh, okay.
He's making a joke. One of those jokes.
Aha, it's a nice dad joke. All right. Another thank you to that glowing face of glory.
Oh, he's talking about Mike.
Talking about you. Talking about you and your horns.
Very
Moses
nice.
had horns, yeah.
Man, I'm
Latin.
I'm struggling. Does this count?
Yeah, you got to put it on. Yeah, there we go.
Is this historical, Mike? Is this historical?
According to people in the Middle Ages, yeah.
Yes.
I love that. I saw a guy I'm going to respond to on TikTok. He was saying that the devil wrote the Bible, and his proof was Moses had horns and medieval artwork. And it's like,
that sounds like something Morg would say.
Morg. Have you seen any of Morg's videos, Zach?
I mean, I watched for like 10 seconds. Does that count?
With the white hair.
Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah, he's got some crazy takes on stuff. He tried to say recently that love thy neighbor as thyself means that we're all one.
I don't remember that one in my concordance.
Well, my favorite part is he did it in a video where he says the church is distorting what the Bible says. Here's what it actually means. Like, oh, wow, projecting much?
Oh man.
What do you got coming up on your channel, Zach?
Oh shoot. Oh man. All right. So lots of Genesis related stuff. So talking about how that relates to science and if those contradict. How the New Testament writers interpreted Genesis. Science topics. So Adam and Eve, the whole like incest conversation. Like how does that work with science? That'll be a weird one. Like genetics, right? Who needs that?
Science.
Yeah, science too. But yeah, that'll be mostly it.
What about you, Than?
I'm experimenting. So I'm gonna be trying to do like one response video a week. So for anybody listening that wants videos to be responded to, send me videos to respond to, and I'll try to make like little short videos at least once a week. Long form content that's coming up. There's a new formulation of the problem of evil going around that I'll be making a video about, and that'll be coming around hopefully this month sometime. And I'm just waiting on some more feedback from some philosophers on stage 2 contingency argument stuff that I've developed. And then that will be coming out. And then if anybody knows who Tim Howard is at Doxastic Mastery, him and I have a new like methodology for arguing for theism called transitive natural theology. And we're going to have a long form video coming out on that topic as well sooner or later. Plus a Minecraft related video, which I think Matt told you about, Mike. But it'll be like a pop level version of our transitive natural theology argument that'll help people at least get thinking about how Tim and I think natural theology should be done.
Yes, I'll be having Joel on my channel. Probably we've not scheduled it yet, but Zach connected us, and I'm gonna have him on my channel to respond to a video that's. So we'll get into that later. So yeah, I'll have him on my channel later. I'm also gonna have Stephen Boyce hopefully on my channel Monday, as long as he gets electricity back. David Falk will probably be on my channel sometime soon because some people like to shoot themselves in the foot and they don't even realize it half the time. But in terms of videos, again, next week, I will have my video on the reliability of John coming out. I will have some more videos in 2025 on the documentary hypothesis and why that, again, is just riddled with problems because there's so many problems I can just keep covering. But then I'm going to start my series I've been wanting to do for a while, how Christianity ended slavery, how Christianity created human rights, how Christianity protected and saved children, how Christianity created science, all that stuff. Because there's a lot of really good history there to cover and a lot of really bad history that needs debunked on that area. So yeah, we'll be covering a lot of that kind of stuff. Tim Peterson says Minecraft video crossover with Redeemed Zoomer.
Everybody keeps saying that. I don't know enough about Redeemed Zoomer to know if there's like a connection between him and Minecraft.
He just does videos like theology, but he plays Minecraft at the same time.
Oh, is that what? No. I'm using Minecraft to argue that God exists. So
can you do it while playing Minecraft?
I'll show you guys my Minecraft world if you really want.
I don't care. I get
me and some friends have been working on our Minecraft world for like years. I have an automatic sorting system. My whole house is like a supercomputer.
Yeah. Well, I'm already bored.
Yeah, great job, Than. Really ruined the video here.
I do not play Minecraft and have no desire to. I tried playing with my daughter once, and I was like, "Oh, I'm having so much fun, honey. How long have we been playing? Oh, only 5 minutes. Okay, I love you."
You like video games at all, Mike?
I'll play Mario Kart occasionally, like Smash Brothers, but I mean, like, I'm just a reader. Like, I just want to read. That's what I want to do. I want to sit. I have all these books I want to read. So it's just this is what I do when I want to have fun. So
Yeah, is your studio in a library now? What in the world?
no, I built I had someone build shelves for me. I didn't build them, but yeah, I was running out of book space, so I was like, I need more bookshelf space. So yeah, and I'm already running out of space now. So yeah, problem. But you know, I think it was like last year around this time, I had to order like 5 books, and I couldn't get any e-copies. I was like, what? Like I can only get a printed copy. I was like, I'm just running out of space. So I think I just coughed up the money, and I was like, all right, please build me some bookshelves. I need something. And I was like, it make a good background too. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
I missed the 30 stacked books next to you. Gosh.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Than, we should I don't know, have a Minecraft server for your audience, and IP is just boring. It's okay. He reads, ew, so unmanly.
If somebody wants to pay for the realm, I will do that, but I'm not going to pay for a realm.
I don't even know what that means.
What a
You have to
nerd.
pay to host a server so that other people can join when you're not like live on it. Don't fall asleep on me. Do you want me to talk about lifting instead?
No, I don't need you to talk about your big muscly arms over there. You just make me sad. All right. Thank you guys for coming on. I hope to have both of these guys back on at some point. Anything else you guys want to say before we close this out?
No, thanks for having me on.
If you're my audience, like and subscribe to Than and my boy Michael Jones over here.
You too. Yeah, go subscribe to Zach. Appreciate a lot of the work he does. Debate IP versus Billy Carson. Yeah, I wish. Oh, I'd jump on that in a heartbeat if I could get him to debate. Man.
That'd be a weird conversation.
Dude, I would. You know what? I know I said I wouldn't pay for a Minecraft realm, but I'd pay for this. I will pay Billy Carson. I will throw my family into debt.
he would gain nothing from it. I doubt he would. What would he gain? He just expose his audience to all his errors. Exactly. I mean, oh man, that guy. Him and like, what was that other guy? Like Amon Hillman? Is that his name?
Yeah. Well, even if those types of people, though, like even if you get them exposed, it's not like something they listen to. It's just like bounces right off their ear or whatever. Like I've never gotten so many comments just like, "You're so stupid." Okay, like what's the argument? Like that, yeah. Like that's all the comments say, you know.
Yeah. All right, thanks for coming, everyone. I should be back on my channel Monday with Stephen Boyce back. We will see you guys next time.